Hello, I'm Achut Nair from Nair's Aviation Ground School. This is the 30th video in a new series of educational aviation videos for the aspiring pilot. Airplanes are extremely safe. In fact, studies have shown that aviation is by far the safest mode of transportation in the world, with much lower accidents, injuries, and deaths than road, rail, or sea transportation. But airplanes are machines, and machines are known to fail at some point. The most common failure in an aircraft often involves the engine. But did you know that an airplane is still able to fly without an engine? This video is about gliding. Gliding flight is heavier than air flight without the use of thrust. This mode of flight involves flying a significant distance horizontally compared to the descent and therefore can be distinguished from a mostly straight downward descent. Some aircraft are built to glide, achieving long distances without the need for power or thrust. These include the aptly named gliders, which are often towed into the sky and use a lift provided by thermals to continue staying aloft for extended periods of time. But in this video, we are focusing on the emergency procedure that involves an engine failure and the subsequent need to glide to the nearest safe landing area, whether it be an airport or any other stretch of usable surface to land safely. In order to prepare for an engine failure situation, student pilots practice power-off landings. Power-off landings involve the pilot selecting a point during the airport pattern where the throttle is completely pulled to idle and the aircraft is flown sans power to the touchdown point. In order to be prepared to fly the aircraft in an engine failure scenario, it is best to treat the event as a power-off approach and landing. The first question you need to answer in a power-off landing scenario is this: do you want to maximize the distance you can glide, or do you want to maximize the amount of time you can stay aloft? Most often, you want to maximize the distance you can glide, at least initially, as you set up for a power-off landing. The airspeed you want to pitch for is best glide speed. No matter what aircraft you fly, the best glide speed is usually published in the aircraft pilot's operating handbook and is often the best airspeed to start with as you're setting up for a power-off landing. Best glide gives you the best glide angle as you drift down, which means that if you maintain best glide all the way to the ground, you'll travel the farthest distance possible without power. There's something you need to keep in mind about best glide though. Like most airspeeds in the POH, best glide is calculated at max gross weight. And as weight decreases, so does the speed that will maximize the distance. The change is minor, but if you're trying to get the most out of your glide, and you're lighter than max gross weight, a slightly slower speed may help you out. If you want to stay in the air for the longest time possible, you want to fly at the minimum sink speed. Unfortunately, there's a problem with that. The minimum sink speed is rarely published for powered aircraft. But there is a way you can figure it out. You have to try it in your own airplane. Minimum sink is always slower than best glide speed because it's the point on the power curve where the least amount of power is required. Keep in mind, you're going quite a bit slower than your best glide speed, and that can significantly impact your glide range. Unless you have a good landing site below you, and you're trying to maximize your time aloft to troubleshoot the engine and talk to air traffic control, minimum sink isn't necessarily going to be as helpful as using best glide speed. Once you've accomplished the aviate part of the flight by configuring the aircraft and pitching or trimming for best glide speed, your next step is to navigate and find a place to land. When it comes to landing sites, you really have two choices: land at an airport or land somewhere else. Typically, your first choice is to land at an airport, if possible. Once you pick an airport and go directly to it, you'll know your distance to the runway. The next question is, can you get there? This is where some quick mental math is required. Most general aviation airplanes, usually Cessna 172s, glide about 1.5 miles for every 1,000 feet of altitude. So, for example, if you're 4,000 feet above the ground, you'll be able to glide about 6 nautical miles before your wheels touch the ground. You should always look at your maximum glide chart found in the POH, but if you don't have it handy during your next engine failure, the 1.5 miles per 1,000 feet will get you close as possible to the maximum gliding distance. If you can't glide to an airport, you need to pick the next best thing. Most of the time, you have quite a few options. When you're preparing for a power-off landing, there are two things you need to consider to make your landing survivable. First, you need to keep the cockpit and cabin as intact as possible by using dispensable parts of the airplane, like the wings, landing gear, and the bottom of the fuselage to slow you down during the landing. And second, you need to prevent your body from hitting the inside of the cockpit during the touchdown by making sure your seatbelt is tight. Most general aviation airplanes are designed to protect you up to 9 Gs of forward acceleration. When you're looking for a place to land, two common places you're going to look for are fields or roads. Unfortunately, both of them come with their fair share of risks. But if you pick a good spot, chances are very high that you'll walk away from that landing. When you're landing off airport, the most critical mistake you can make is not controlling your aircraft attitude and sink rate. Fortunately, you can control both of them all the way to the touchdown. No matter where you are, if you land in a nose-low or level altitude, you risk sticking the nose into the ground. That's going to flip your plane or make you stop very quickly, which can easily cost more than just a few bumps or bruises. Steep bank angles before landing are just as bad. When you're in a steep bank, your stall speed is significantly higher. And on top of that, if you strike your wing to the ground, your plane will cartwheel, making the landing much less survivable than a straight ahead deceleration. No matter where you're landing, you want to set yourself up for a straight ahead, nose high landing into the wind, so you can land at a slow ground speed and use the airplane to protect yourself. You need to be also very careful about adding flaps too early in your setup for an off-field landing. Otherwise, the best laid plans will go out the window and you'll end up landing extremely short. Landing gear position is another thing you have to think about. There's no hard and fast rule on using landing gear, but if you have retractable gear, you have a few more choices to make. If you're touching down on something soft like a plowed field, landing with your gear down means there's a reasonable chance your gear will dig into the dirt and flip the airplane. But if you're landing on a hard surface, such as a road, putting your gear down helps cushion the touchdown, as well as decelerate the plane all the way to a complete stop. As you touch down, remember the words of the legendary pilot Bob Hoover. If you're faced with a forced landing, fly the thing as far into the crash as possible. After you come to a complete stop, there are two things you want to do quickly. If you have time, activate your ELT or emergency location transmitter so search and rescue can find you. And secondly, get the passengers and yourself out of the airplane. Executing a good power out landing comes down to flying the airplane all the way to a complete stop, picking the best landing spot, and letting ATC know your situation. Do all three, and you have a landing that is successful and one that you can walk away from. Understanding the fundamentals involved in gliding can help a pilot during an emergency. Despite aviation's renowned safety record, problems still occur. No pilot wants an engine failure, but they do occur, and being prepared can allow the pilot to continue operating the aircraft safely in all situations. The prepared pilot is a safe pilot. For more information, please contact us at liftanddrag@gmail.com and visit our website at nyersaviation.webnode.com. Thank you. Safe flying.